All right, we're going to go ahead and start. Welcome to the CEDS webinar, Common Education Data Standards 101. My name is Dwayne Brown, and I am the Deputy Director of the CEDS initiative. CEDS spends a lot of time working in various other initiatives and organizations, and we like to ask a lot of questions as we're out and about, talking with people, basically things like who knows what CEDS is, and what are things that CEDS can help you with. And as we've been around for many years now, perhaps we've overassumed that individuals knew about CEDS and the resources that CEDS can provide to you. At a recent conference, we saw a number of individuals indicate that they were new to CEDS, and in fact, they were actually new to education data in general. And so we thought it was necessary and a good idea to go ahead and offer a CEDS 101 course, as there may be a lot of new faces at many state and local education agencies who are hearing about CEDS basically for the first time. So a little bit about the format. Well, there are a lot of you on this webinar, so we've muted all of the lines to keep the noise level down. Then we are also recording this webinar, and we're going to post it to the CEDS community site for future reference, and I'll show you where that information about that community site is a little bit later on. If you have questions along the way as we're going through, feel free to put those into the chat box to me or to put those into the question and answer location, and I will do my best to answer those as we go and still try to keep us on track. I will warn you though, however, I am easily distracted, so I may just avoid some of the questions early on until the end of the webinar, or we may dangerously get off track onto some kind of tangent and I will never find my way back to the original place where we're supposed to be. So I will do my best to keep an eye on that, but I'm a one-tasker, and so watching that while I'm doing the presentation may be a little bit difficult, so be aware of that. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to for this webinar, we're basically going to go over the key investigative questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how, and we're going to spend probably the majority of our time on the how, so that way we can go through and answer some things about CEDS that you may not be aware of. So first we're going to start with what. What is CEDS? And basically, as it states right there, CEDS is a national collaborative effort to develop voluntary common data standards for a key set of education data elements. So it's a vocabulary. It includes standard definitions, it has option sets, it has technical specifications, and all of that to streamline sharing and comparing. Basically, it's education vocabulary. It's an attempt to define at a granular level any element that exists that is specific to education. From this, we basically are able to then create a foundational language that we can all use when we start talking about education data. So the purpose is just a voluntary common vocabulary for all of us. Who is CEDS? You are actually CEDS. CEDS is you. Everyone on this call is CEDS because anyone can contribute to and can help shape CEDS and the elements that are in there. It's not something that's driven by the U.S. Department of Education. You drive CEDS. U.S. states, U.S. state agencies, as early childhood, as vendors, as organizations, standards bodies, initiatives, you all drive CEDS. So as CEDS adds elements and defines them, it's actually the communication of education stakeholders who drive the areas that are the priorities for us to work on each year. So the community states, we need a definition for X, Y, and Z. CEDS, along with stakeholders from the community who know about X, Y, and Z, work to define those elements and to put those into CEDS. CEDS contains elements from early childhood through K-12, post-secondary, career tech, adult education, and workforce. And stakeholders from all of those different groups, as well as organizations, foundations, vendors, and so on, those all contribute to CEDS. So as I stated from the beginning, CEDS is you. As we look at the tools, as we look at the different things that are available inside of CEDS, you all tell us what needs to be there. We want this tool. We want to be able to see things this way. We'd prefer if you had that. All of that is driven by stakeholders that come to CEDS with comments and questions and needs and those sort of things. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide here, and we're going to say why CEDS. Think about your own systems and where you have data stored. Think about the individuals who work in your offices and who may work with data on a regular basis. And now as you're thinking about all of those people, all of those systems, all those reports, does every system, every document you have, every report you're aware of, every person who works where you work, do they refer to an element in the same way? And the answer is obviously no, they don't. The education environment we grew up in, right? So I grew up in the education environment of the Oklahoma State Department of Education and the terminology used in that area for how they called things, and specifically to the office that I was a part of, not necessarily the other offices and program areas inside of that department. So the education environment I grew up in, it helped shape how I would reference a particular element. So all of us have an education environment we grow up in, and that shapes how we would reference a particular element. Our element names and even the meaning behind them will sometimes vary slightly from person to person and from system to system and report to report. So looking at some examples there on the screen from a K-12 perspective, would you call it a local education agency, or would you call it a district? Or would you call it an administrative unit? Or would you call it something completely different? You might, right? They may mean the same thing. They may not mean the same thing. And so now we have a difference of vocabulary. I see a question that came through was, so for an example, the difference between registered and enrolled and active student, right? There's different things related to, are you enrolled? Are you active, right? A student may be enrolled, but they're not showing up, so they're not active. So yes, you have terminologies, and behind those elements and those names that we use, there can be confusion in the meaning. So another example we have listed up there, is it limited English proficiency, or is it English language learner? Do you call it a generation code, or do you call it a suffix? Or do you call those things something completely different? So our vocabulary differs, and because of this, we spend many resource hours interpreting and translating, right? So when you say local education agency and I say district, or you say administrative unit, do we mean the same thing? And now we have to have a conversation. And then we have the conversation to determine, oh yes, we actually do mean the same thing. Or no, in this situation, we actually mean something different. It's all about trying to get down to that definition. What do you really mean when you say this? And what do I really mean when I say that? So for instance, an open records request comes through. It's asking for element A, B, and C. What do you have to do? You have to figure out what on earth they mean by element A, B, and C. Then you get that into a vocabulary you're comfortable with so you can pull out the data. Then we figure it out and we give it back to them as elements D, E, and F. And now they have to figure out what we mean by D, E, and F so they can understand it in the context of A, B, and C, which is where they're comfortable. So CEDS is an effort to create a vocabulary that we can all refer to. It doesn't change our own vocabulary. It may. We may, adopt some of the things from CEDS and say, I would prefer to say it that way. And so that becomes our vocabulary. Or it just is a way for us to talk. When we reference our own vocabulary, we're able to have a bridge from our vocabulary to CEDS, and somebody else has a bridge from their vocabulary to CEDS, and now we can communicate, sort of like a Rosetta Stone for education vocabulary. Where is CEDS? CEDS in 56 states and territories, some agency there, at least one, has a CEDS map that they've put, and at least 24 agencies inside of 24 states and territories, well, it could be more than one, but inside of 24 states and territories, at least one agency has shared a map publicly. So what is a map? There's a free tool called CEDS Align, which I'll go over a little bit here, that you can take your own internal vocabulary we were just talking about, and you can map it over to the CEDS vocabulary. So you may say district, but CEDS says local education agency. And with a map of your data, others can clearly see that when you say district in your system, you mean local education agency. And when you say your system says English language learner, in CEDS you mean limited English proficient, which is what CEDS would have. So by creating that map, you basically created for your own vocabulary that CEDS Rosetta Stone for your agency. Where else is CEDS? The second bullet there, by the end of 2019, we're predicting, based off of what we know from various states that are working towards this, that at least 10 to 15 state agencies are actually going to have CEDS as a core state system. So not just a vocabulary, they're actually going to have it down to the database level, CEDS vocabulary in their state. Not only will they going to have the Rosetta Stone, they'll have adopted CEDS as a way to internally store their data. In effect, they won't be translating from their native education language to CEDS. CEDS in this system will be their native language for that particular course system. They'll, of course, have other systems in their state as well, where there'll be translation and things of that nature, but they will have a core CEDS system in their state. So about 10 to 15 is the prediction by the end of 2019. The third bullet, in each of the domains from early childhood to workforce, there are use cases where CEDS is being used in some way. So you have various different things taking place in early childhood using CEDS, and post-secondary and career tech, and different agencies and organizations that are using CEDS. And we find out about more each day. Every time we go to a conference, we learn something new we didn't know before about a way somebody's using it. We've also learned over the last couple years that at least 14 education software vendors are using CEDS. Sometimes it's as simple as they use elements from CEDS when they need to add an element to their system. And then we also are aware of vendors who have actually made CEDS core to their particular software application. So all of CEDS or a certain domain of CEDS is actually core to their system. And then finally, CEDS is a part of a number of other education data standard initiatives. We collaborate regularly with EdFi, with Access for Learning, with Badger Alliance, with LRMI, with a host of other organizations and foundations and standards. The goal to ensure that there's a consistent collaboration in this space around that vocabulary. So don't reinvent the wheel, essentially. If you're going to put an element in, look at CEDS, let's have a discussion. If CEDS needs to create an element, let's look at what you've already done over in this other standards organization so that we have consistency and collaboration between those organizations. So that's where CEDS is. When do you use CEDS? There are a lot of major categories on this screen. You have data management, you have data governance, you have transparency, integration, you have use cases where you're going to do work, collecting and reporting data, research. All of those are major categories, and there's a lot that goes into each of those. But when you look at those, all of those involve elements. All of those involve understanding the meaning of the data and how you're going to use data in a particular way. And when you start talking about data, basically when a data element is involved, there's an opportunity to use CEDS because you're looking at a foundational piece of information there. Another way to look at it, consider when you collect data, whether it's from an LEA or a career tech center or an institute of higher education, however you bring data into your organization or system, or when you collect data perhaps from assessment vendors or from other agencies, data sharing agreements, you're bringing data in. There are a number of different ways that data come into your agency, and I guarantee, because I've been in the state agency at least, that you receive a lot of elements that are very similar, if not the same, but they're all named differently when you collect them and when you store them. Just think about birth date, for instance. In one system, it's called birth date. In another, it's called date of birth. And in a third one, it's called DOB. So 3 different element names for a single element that means exactly the same thing in all 3 collections or in all 3 storage systems. So then someone comes to you and wants to know how many places do you store that particular element, such as birth date or DOB. Now it's time to start translating, right? So when you use data and you display a report back to someone, LEA, Career Center, Tech Center, Public Researcher, whatever, are the elements consistently named from report to report? You call it birth date on this one and DOB on this one and date of birth on this one. So there's inconsistency in those sorts of reports. When one program office collects data and they write up instructions for what they're collecting, are their element names in the instructions consistent with the element names from another program office who are writing instructions for a different collection but with the same elements that overlap, such as the date of birth again? Is there a process in place for governance when a new element's going to be collected? How's it going to be named? How's it going to be defined? What about your database administrators and architects who build that web of things behind the scenes, right? And they're going to name those columns inside of those tables. They're going to give them names. Is there a process in place that defines how they will name those columns that exist behind the scenes? So there's consistency in systems. keeping you from having to translate over and over again. In this system, in the database, we called it this. In this system, in the database, we called it this, and so on and so on. You have various different things like that. So all of these are opportunities to look at CEDS as a standard because they're all talking about an element, the meaning behind the element, what you should call the element, and how you may want to use that particular element name. And just to torment you, here's a list of examples of what you may be collecting, storing, using, governing. Having worked for the State Department of Education for over 8 years, I still cringe a little when I see this list because I know the effort it takes to get information out of all of this data without a standard built across all of it, right? Everything's different. And you have people who are asking you for data, and it's all different and all labeled differently in every one of the different systems that exist inside of wherever you may be, and you've got to find a way to bring it all together. And so you say, I get it. Managing data is not easy. Using a standard to manage it makes sense, but how does CEDS help me start to move in that direction? It's not something that you do overnight. You don't suddenly become standard. You don't suddenly have everything solved, but it's a process of moving forward. How do we begin to make that transition, to move forward, to start making decisions and governing our processes? So that takes us finally to the last question, which is how, which is where we'll spend most of our time here. How do I CEDS? How do I use CEDS? How will it help me? What can I do with that? First, one thing you really need to know what you have. So related to data, related to elements, what do you collect? What do you store? What is that information? Someone internal to your agency or your organization, they may need to know what you have, or someone external may need to know what you have or what you collect, right? You may be getting requests for data, or it may be for reporting purposes. You need to know what you have and where it's located. And while you might know that in your head, does the person who comes after you have a way of knowing that also? Does the person in the other program office know what you have? And do you know what the other person in the other program office has that would allow you to look and see, hey, we both have the same thing, we have some different things, and we have some similar things. Can we combine these things together, make it easier on whoever we collect data from or how we use data, or make the data more consistent? There are two ways kind of to go about this using CEDS. First, you could decide that CEDS will be your data dictionary, and you're going to map your systems over to CEDS. And second, you could decide to use CEDS as a bridge to allow someone else to understand your own internal vocabulary and data dictionary, and use CEDS as a resource to help fill in the gaps where you don't have your own data defined. So a good data dictionary, at its minimum, is going to give you element names. It's going to give you definitions so you understand the meaning of those elements and the data that's going to be inside, that's going to be stored there. It's going to let you know where the data is stored inside your system. You can also think about it like this. You have the birth date, you have the date of birth, you have the DOB. Which one of those is going to be your element name? You don't want to have 3 when we start talking about what elements do you collect, right? You don't want to have 3 of those because they all have one meaning. They all mean the same thing. So if a legislator came and said, I need you to give me a list of all the elements you collect or that you store, provide that to me. Are you going to hand them all 3 of those? We collect the date of birth, we also collect the DOB, we also collect the birth date. Or would you pare it down to 1 and provide that 1? We collect the birth date, and here's a definition of what birth date means. We collect first name, and here's a definition of what first name is. All right, so you're providing that one thing, that's your element, along with its meaning, and you can hand that over. So when using CEDS as your data dictionary, you would select birth date along with the CEDS definition. That's your data dictionary for birth date, right? Then using CEDS, you could link all of your systems and the locations where that birth date exists over to that single definition, so that the system with birth date and the system with date of birth and the system with DOB all have that element linked to the CEDS element of birth date. So now when they say, here's birth date, and here are the 5 or 6 or 10 different places we store that. Over here it's called DOB, over here it's called date of birth, over here it's called birth date, over here it's called something else. But they all link up because they're all birth date. So you have one way to do that, and you have a definition for that. You may also decide to go with DOB. Let's say that you decide to go with your own vocabulary internally at your agency, which is a very good idea if you decide to do that. to go with, have a good governance program that helps you decide as an agency, we're going to call it DOB. So let's say you go with DOB as in the second bullet point, but you don't really have a good definition. You just know it's a birth date, right? That's the definition. Well, you can't really use the definition inside of the term inside the definition to define it. So you don't really have a good definition of DOB, so you go to CEDS and use CEDS's definition for birth date. Now you have a definition. So it's not only does CEDS provide you with a ready-made kind of data dictionary. If you've already got your own data dictionary, you already have your own element names, but you need definitions, you can go to CEDS to grab those. Again, if you're mapped over to CEDS, you would find DOB, which is what you call it internally. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on to the next thing here and take a look at CEDS. So CEDS contains over 1,500 defined education elements. If you go to the CEDS website and you click on elements, until the next screen comes up, it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. And from here, you can download elements and definitions in an Excel file. So this link, basically right here, the complete version 6, which I am made aware of. Right now it's changed over to version 7. We have just released version 7 today. So be aware of that. My slides are old, even though they were made just like a day or two ago, because version 7's out. So basically you would have this, you would click on the complete version, and it's going to give you everything, right? You would end up with a complete listing of all of the CEDS element names, their definitions, their option sets, and that would all be located there, everything applicable to the element. To pare it down some more, you could select a domain specific to what you do. Are you in early childhood? Are you in post-secondary? Are you in career tech? Are you looking at a P20 system where you're going to need all of those anyway, and merging all those things together? So you can select a specific domain to what you do. And so what would you do with this? If you're looking at using CEDS as a data dictionary, like here's our element name, here's our definition, and we're going to link all of our systems over to these elements, you can basically go through and eliminate all of those that you don't collect, store, or use. And with what remains, you have a very good starting point for a rather robust data dictionary with the elements already named and defined for you. Going from this same page over here, something else that you can do where you pull the entire Excel, down below you can also choose to only pull certain applicable sections into an Excel file. So you could get that information out of CEDS. So if you were a post-secondary institution, for instance, you would just select post-secondary, and you could select post-secondary student and pull that down if you're just looking for definitions related to students. You could even open that one up and have more subsections like related to demographics or address information, depending on what it is that you're looking for definitions for, and you're able to pull all of that down into an Excel spreadsheet where you have all of it, where you can begin working with it there. Okay, from that starting point, you would have hundreds of already defined elements to use for your data dictionary. But let's say you were further along and you wanted to use your own element names. You could pull in some of the CEDS element definitions because some or all of your elements weren't defined perhaps. You could also use CEDS as a bridge across your systems and as a source to help you define the elements you already have. So whatever you do related to elements, whether you're going to use the CEDS element name or you're going to use your own element name, you still need to link it, the systems and everything, over to CEDS so that you can utilize that CEDS element as the bridge for where everything is located. And that is all done inside of a tool called Align that CEDS offers. So there's a free resource that CEDS offers called Align. It allows you to import your data dictionaries. Quick side note for what that means when we say data dictionary. Usually that means a system name, a database name, a table name, and a column name. You don't have to have a true data dictionary to start the process. You don't need to have definitions or data stewards or all the various different things that can actually be imported into this data dictionary. You don't need all of that. Usually when somebody's starting out here, it's because they need help with a data dictionary, or they want to make their own data dictionary available to researchers and other individuals. But if you don't have much, you just got a database and a table name and a column name, that's a good place to start. That's when you really need to start here so that you can get some definitions for what you're actually storing and have that information available to you for governance and transparency and those sort of things. So if you're trying to create a dictionary, you won't likely have anything more than just the table and the column name. After you have your metadata in there, you can then align it to CEDS. And once you've aligned, it allows you to run reports to compare across aligned maps, and then you're able to analyze what you have. Go to this one here. Okay, quick note before I show you more about this. To use the Align or the Connect tools that I'm going to talk about, you would have to log in to CEDS. You can, which is free, and anybody can do it. You can easily create an account on CEDS. You can manage your own account information, free to have an account. Anyone can have one, state agencies, local agencies, vendors, organizations. Anyone who wants one can go in and create a CEDS account. The reason is, in order to save what it is that you're doing, you want to save your map and be able to come back and access it again, or when we talk about the Connect tool a little bit, you want to be able to save that information to come back, you have to have an account to be able to save that. Okay, so that, clearing that one out. Once you have the account, you can then create and you can manage what we call maps in the Align tool, which is basically your data dictionary information aligned to a CEDS element. So you say DOB, we say birth date. You say date of birth, we say birth date. You say birth date, we say birth date. Right? 3 different elements in 3 different locations in your system, but all 3 aligned to the exact same CEDS element of birth date. You'll notice on the right side there is information for learning. We're not going to go into great detail today about how to use the tool and as in a step-by-step. It's just a 101. We're going to be covering at a high level what it's for, but there are some resources there to get you started, and I'll also mention some other resources at the end, as well as we can provide training to your organization or your agency. If you need further training, we're happy to provide that. Okay, the bulk of what is inside of a map is located here. So you can see there's a lot of metadata that you can put in about your elements. You may have it, you may not. That's okay. Really all you need is an element name to start with. The system name, the database name, the table, the column, the element name. There's a location for definition if you have one. If you don't have one for your own internal use, that's fine. That's why you're here. We can help get you a definition, right? There's a data type for what may be stored there. Is it a varchar or an inchar? We know what's the data type that's there. How long is it? If you want to reference anything such as legislation or put a link related to that particular element, you can do that. And you can have information about data stewards or internal contacts. One quick thing to note, if you decide to share your map so that others can see it, so you can have a private map, whatever you do with it, it's yours, internally. You can also share it with a few people. You can manage other users on the map that allows you to have them come in and work on it, and only a handful of people can see it. But there's also where you can share the map out and everybody can see it. But the note I wanted to make is that when you share it out so everybody can see it, there are certain pieces of information that are excluded from that shared map, such as data steward, internal contacts, comments. There's certain things that you just have for your own management purpose that aren't available for everyone to see and only available to the administrators of the map. You can see in the example here that we have an element called ELL, and you'll notice that it has no definition. So from our earlier example, at the beginning we talked about that. This is English language learner, right? Let's click further down. Further down that screen, we see that the element's been aligned to CEDS and to an element called limited English proficiency status. And then you can also see further down the option sets related to ELL. So, what could you do with this? If you have your elements listed in this particular tool without their definitions and you align them to the CEDS elements using the knowledge that you have in your head, which is what we need to get out and document, about what your elements actually mean, you can run reports that provide you with your element listed beside the CEDS element name and definition. So you can see here we have 3 different sample elements, one for race, one for grade, one for ELL. In the agency's data dictionary, there's no definition. That's going to make it difficult to explain to someone what is actually stored in that location. Unless they knew that the letters capital E, capital L, stood, what that stood for, that it was English language learner, or what it was intended to indicate, what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to start asking questions to find out what they're looking for. I'm looking for limited English proficiency status. That's what they're looking for, right? And they go to the database and they see ELL. They know it has a yes or no, but they don't know anything else about it. They have no idea what ELL even means, right? So this is a resource drain for both you, for the employee who needs the answers to those questions. So by using CEDS, you now have a definition you can use exactly as written, or you can customize it to fit your needs for the element, making it much easier to know exactly what you're looking at. That top example, for instance, race, what do you have listed in there? A letter? Maybe that's your option set. Maybe it's a number inside your option set. Do they have any idea what those particular things mean? Do they have definitions related to them? You know, what is American Indian or Alaska Native? How do you explain that to someone? So there's lots of things that are going to need definitions. So they can go and they can say, okay, I know what this means. I see using CEDS that this is limited English proficiency status, which means all of these things. So that's where I would go. I would go to ELL to get my limited English proficiency status out of the system. And now you've closed that gap of knowledge that someone else needs information out of your head, or they need that knowledge to be able to complete some task. And with CEDS, you're able to now define those particular elements. Okay, coming back over to here. So if CEDS is natively your data dictionary, you can work towards having individuals request and talk about data using that particular vocabulary for clarity. If you use it as a bridge, individuals can use CEDS as the starting point to help explain the data they're looking at or they're looking for inside of your particular system. As we mentioned before, a number of agencies have shared their map information for CEDS, not just internally, but shared it publicly so that others can see it. Why would this be a good idea? You're not sharing actual data, right? You're not sharing anything about students. We don't collect anything like that at CEDS. You're just sharing metadata, element name, element definition, system information, that sort of thing. So sharing your CEDS aligned data dictionary, it would provide metadata for key groups, such as institutions who report to you. Here's what we have. Here's how we define it. Here's what it's called. You have media and legislators or any other individuals like researchers or those doing open records requests. It makes it a much easier time requesting data because they know what to call it, right? Go to this map when you want to request data from us, select from these elements here, and then hand it to us, and then we're able to much more quickly find those elements and know what it is that you're looking for. When they have to use their own vocabulary, especially like media, they don't know sometimes what they're even asking for. They don't know how to say it. They don't know how to call it, but they ask for it, and then you got to figure out what it is. This provides the ability to see, okay, I know what you have. I can see what it is. I can see how it's defined. I can see what the option sets are. I want to know information about this particular thing. So it provides that to them. They have a list of elements. They have definitions they can request. And when they make the request, it's already linked for you through CEDS and through the Align tool. It's already linked back to your system, your database, and your table, making it easier to retrieve. It also makes it easier to write those MOUs when you're going to do data sharing agreements, what's going to be shared from this agency to this agency or this one to this one. Here's a list of the data elements that will be shared. And those elements that you list could be standard using CEDS element names. And then all of the Align maps, also they come with their own unique URL that you can post for your agency or for your organization that would give individuals a direct link to the data dictionary information and then to all the tools that are available inside of CEDS related to that. So they can go and they can see that information. So that's those are definite reasons to make that publicly available. Okay, I have a quick question that came through. What is the difference between the CEDS element data model ID used in the upload compared to the CEDS element ID shown on the online drop-down 6 characters? There are two things. We have two identifiers inside of CEDS related elements. So we in CEDS have over 1,500 elements defined. For those, we have a global ID, and that, I am trying to count on my fingers, is the 6-digit one. So that's the global ID. So a person has a first name. We've defined first name. A student has a first name. A parent has a first name. A teacher has a first name. All of these different people have first names. There's a 6-digit number for first name. It's the global ID. It never changes. It always means first name. The 5-digit number refers to the context related to that particular name. Is it the student's first name? It would be this 5-digit number. Is it the teacher's first name? It would be this 5-digit number. Is it an early childhood student's first name? Is it a parent's first name? Is it a staff member's first name? So all of those things have a 5-digit number related to them so that they can give context to the particular first name. So there's a global ID, which represents an element that's defined, and there's a contextual ID, which represents an element in its context and where it would be used there. So that's the difference kind of between those two particular IDs. All right, moving on here. Okay, so we've talked about using CEDS to kind of identify your data. Now we're going to talk about using CEDS to compare or integrate data in 2 or more systems. Perhaps internally, you want to know about redundancies in data, where a program office is collecting, multiple things. Or maybe as part of the P20W effort, you're going to need to integrate data together. In this situation, CEDS can work as the bridge between the 2 sets of data. So how do you make the comparison? We go back to Align, to the tool. First, you need to know what you have. We talked about that. Here's my system, here's my database, here's my table, here's my element, here's what it maps over to CEDS. I've got all that information there. So now I have CEDS linked over to my information. So if you've done the work to identify what you have and where it's located and it's aligned to CEDS, the comparison part is really actually rather easy. There are reports that you can run that are going to take 2 or more maps using the CEDS element. It's going to line the elements up one right next to another that have the same CEDS element name. So in this example, we selected EdFi, Data Standard 2.0 map, which is shared inside of CEDS. So if you're interested in EdFi or want to know more about that, obviously they have a website, but you can go to CEDS and take a look at some EdFi maps. They're available, they're shared publicly, which is linked over to CEDS. So they call their particular element related to limited English, they call it Limited English Proficiency Descriptor. And then we have, in our test warehouse that we have, that we're for a demonstration, we have our element called ELL that we've talked about before that we know means English Language Learner. And then in CEDS, we have the element Limited English Proficiency Status. That acts as a bridge from EdFi to our own system. So now I can see that EdFi's Limited English Proficiency Descriptor is the same thing as my Student Personal ELL. And in the crosswalk, the bridge that allowed me to do that was that both of those were aligned to CEDS. So I now have a Limited English Proficiency in the middle, and CEDS now has allowed me to walk that through. So if you were reducing redundancies and you had multiple maps in there from different program areas and different systems, this will show you the location where each of these elements exists in your own systems. It gives you kind of a one-to-one using CEDS is that here we have DOB, here we have date of birth, here we have birth date. All 3 of these line up to each other using CEDS. If you were doing integration work, it shows you where the same information exists inside of both systems. And not only that, it would provide you with a ready-made standard to base the integration on. So if you're going to do any kind of integration work, you're probably, unless it's federated, you're probably going to create a 3rd system, a 3rd set of data. Are you going to create a brand new standard that's really a custom standard? Is it going to be a hybrid of both of those? Or are you going to utilize a common national standard for having that data in one location? So doing this, linking that all up, gives you actually a common standard that you can build upon to do the integration work. And then you could use the CEDS element names and the definitions for that particular integrated work. All right, so that kind of gives you an idea related to how to use CEDS for that. There was a question that came through, but they found it. Okay, see how easy I am to be distracted? Can I search for agencies that have a public data dictionary? For example, I want to align a database I'm creating with an agency that is in CEDS, but I don't have their link. But they found it. Wait, those were 2 different people. Maybe they're not 2 different people. Anyway, when you go to CEDS, let me actually pull that up here real quick. Share. And I can show you. So when you come into CEDS, yes, it's there on the screen. If you want to look at the Align, you go to Tools and Align. And then you would explore map-based reports. And we'll just click All for now. And any of the states that are in bold, you can select those. And then any maps that they have shared, you're able to then see what they have publicly shared to make available to you. As I mentioned before, everybody but 4 of these actually has maps, but only 24 of them have shared publicly so that you're actually able to see the information, and anybody can then look and see how did Colorado define it, how did Michigan define it, how does Oklahoma define this particular element, how do they set those things up. So it allows you opportunity to kind of look across states and see how they're utilizing that particular information. Okay, let's go back over to here, and good. Now we're going to talk about using data. So when it's time to start using data, we spend some time talking about managing it and making it transparent, what you have, how to integrate it. Now we're going to use it. CEDS tools and elements are a good starting place for using data. Let's click over to here. Just a couple examples of data use that I know is going to take place for at least some of the people on this call. They're going to be involved in this. There's going to be requests for data that are going to be made. You're obviously going to have state and federal reporting take place. You're going to be collecting data from various people. You're going to be building reports. You're going to be building dashboards. You're going to be building various visualizations of the data are going to be out there. So you have all those different things that are going to be taking place, and then a host of others where you're going to have to use data. People want information. So with those in mind, I've kind of developed 4 main ingredients for your data use case. First, what are you trying to convey or answer? And we're going to call this the question. Right? Think of state and federal reporting as just a big long list of questions. What is it that the state or US Ed wants to know? Right? Those are questions. Anything, a data request, what is that? It's a question. You're trying to find something out. So you're asking for information. Research request, it's a question. They're all questions. The same is true of a dashboard report. They are there to answer a question. Next, we need to know the elements that are needed to convey that information. So you have a list of elements. We're going to do something with those elements to turn them into the answer that's being looked for. That's the transformation that will take place, or the analysis that you'll go through, and then finally we can provide the information or the answer to the question. So you have the question, the elements tell you the data that you need to answer it, you transform those elements in some way to get to the answer. Seeing it visually, with our 4 examples, there's the question, where's this data stored? Where are those elements at? Right? I have the question, I've identified the elements I need, where are they? They're located here, and then you're going to pull out that data and then transform it into the answer. Some common challenges that you may face with each of the categories, the questions, the elements, the transformation, and the answer. When we think about the question, what are they asking for? Has it been asked before? Probably it has, right? Has somebody else already done the work to identify the elements? Probably they have. Did we store it somewhere so that I can look through it and find the work that's already been done? Probably not. So we're going to do it all over again? Probably we are. Can someone else who is asking this question go to that central repository of questions that have already been asked? Probably not. Right? Wouldn't it be great if they could, though? Wouldn't it be great if the work that's already been done before with the questions and the that have been asked, that has already have been logged somewhere, that somebody could go and say, I want to ask that question also. Here it is. Somebody else has already asked it. And then, when you think about the elements, when this use case is created, are more standard elements and definitions used every time? Or were the elements that are used and listed, was that the vocabulary of the person responsible for it? So each time you do a data request, the vocabulary changes based on the person who's actually going through that. Or was a standard used to list out those elements? The place where the standard elements are stored that are readily available to everyone who needs access to that list, is there a place where that's stored? Right, so they go to, we're going to build out the request now. We have a data request, we have a report, we have whatever. These are the list of elements to use, and everybody can access those. Start with those first. If it's not in that list, we'll have to deal with that. But if it's in the list, always call it birth date. Always call it limited English proficiency status. Always call it this when you're listing out those particular elements for whatever the use case is. So is there a place that's available that they can go to access that list, such as your data dictionary? Are there business-friendly element names with definitions linked to the location where the data are actually stored? So they go through and say, I need limited English proficiency status, I need birth date, it's going to require the first and last name of the student, it's going to require the student's unique ID, their student identifier, it's going to require the school name, it's going to require the school's identifier, and you're checking off those things, and as you check those off, you're immediately building a bridge over to your system. Right? Does that exist? Do you have that place where as you check off those names, a bridge is built to where that data is actually stored? Here's a list of elements, and it's easy to get to that particular location. Every time this was developed in the past, did we store it somewhere so that we can repeat this process or so that we can review it, right? Did that take place? Probably not. What if it could? Wouldn't that be great? Transformation, the analysis, the transformation process, was that documented? Could someone refer to the documentation and recreate the process using the list of elements so that I don't have to create it over and over again? The queries that pulled that data out of that system, did we store those somewhere so that I can easily recreate that particular process? Is the answer linked back to a process so that the requester or the one using the information can see the transformation process that took place and the elements that were involved? Could this information or a similar one be recreated easily? Could the answer itself be posted in the central repository of the questions, assuming, of course, it complies with privacy laws, so that the next time a person asks for the same question, the answer is already there? Or perhaps we have information that tells us where we stored the answer because we had to keep it private, so that we can find it readily available and go get that, right? So all of these things, it'd be great if we could do that. Well, CEDS can help with that particular process. And that's done through another tool called Connect. Imagine you had over 1,500 education elements to work with, and someone asked you a question. You would select from your list of 1,500 education elements what you needed to answer that question. You would determine how you would analyze or transform those elements to get the answer, and then you can provide it. That's what you can do inside of CEDS Connect. So you can create both private and publicly shared connections, so you can keep them internal. You can make them external. The question is basically the title and the description of the connection. What is it that we're looking for here? A short description and then a long description of what this actually answers, what the question is and what it will answer. Then you have the elements. Again, you select from over 1,500 CEDS elements. So you're check marking, right? You're just going through and check marking those particular elements to create your own elements if they're not in CEDS. And to do that, you basically are just looking through those domains, right? Find the elements you're looking for, check mark them, add them to the connection. Then you have the analysis recommendation section. That's where you would put the transformation information. Here's what we did with the elements to get the answer. All of that can be documented and stored there inside of the connection. And then finally, you have places where you can put the answer. When it's applicable, you could post a link to the actual report that somebody else could go and get to. So if somebody asks the same question, they could go there, see the question's been asked, see the elements, the analysis that went into it, click on the link, and they can go see the answer. And they can get access to that data when it's, not privacy protected. It's a certain type of data. You can also, in the comments section, leave information for yourself about where you would go to get that inside of your own system, inside of folders when it is privacy protected, and you have to keep that information secure. So all of that can be done through CEDS. And now we're going to bring the whole thing together. You have a need to use your data. There's data requests, reporting, internal needs, data sharing. You put your question into Connect. Up at the top, you see all of that where you've put your questions in. You've identified those elements in Connect from CEDS. Down below, you have your systems documented. You have them aligned to CEDS using that align tool in the map. Because the connection used CEDS elements to define out the question and analysis, and because your align map links your own system information to CEDS elements, you now have a bridge that takes you from the connection question all the way to where the data are stored in your local system. So let's take a look at this. Share. What this would look like inside of here. And let me log in real quick. Make sure that goes. There we go. We're going to go over to Connect. And we're going to find a connection that already exists. There are several, or hundreds in here that you can look through that people have already done. So for instance, if you wanted to look at what others have done related to absenteeism, can I spell? Here's some connections related to absenteeism. If you wanted to take a look at stuff related to employment, did you mean yes, I did mean that, thanks. Employment outcome indicators, here's some things in here related to that. What's the value add for secondary and post-secondary programs? What's the average earning of 2, 5, and 10 years? And so there's different ways people have gone through and said these are the elements you would need to do this, to answer this question. And here's how you would take those elements and how you would transform them to answer that particular question. So one thing, what we're going to look at here is, Let's go back to the beginning because I think it was recently released. Here we go. The Common Application for College and University. Common Application for College and University Applications. So what we have here is related to a collection of data elements that are needed to complete the Common Application. An undergraduate college admission application students may use to apply to close to 700 colleges. These are the data elements that you would have for the Common Application. Quite a few. Does your system contain those data elements would be the question. You would then go to My Connect, and if you had an align map available in there, we're going to use EdFi as an example. Thinking. Make sure it comes up here. It did. Scroll up. Make sure it does. I'm watching two screens to make sure. Okay. So you can see here on the left side is a CEDS element that was in that connection, and on the right side where it's located inside of EdFi system. So we basically just put those two things together because EdFi is linked over to CEDS through a line. We can see that session type over in EdFi is the term descriptor code value. We can see that the position title for employment is the staff education organization assignment position title inside of EdFi. So your system would be over there on the right side showing you where that particular element is located. So that's just one of the things that kind of brings the whole thing together. All right. Time we got, we're doing good. So the tools inside of CEDS are all linked through the CEDS elements, making it easier to go from the question to the location of the data that can provide the answer. Anyone can build connections and make them available. So as you work on data use cases in your state or your agency or organization, and you know that others or think that others might be interested in those, you can build those into Connect and make them available as part of the repository of connections that anyone can use, which would save a lot of people a lot of time by going through and looking through those. EdFacts is all defined inside of there. Those are in there as well at the CEDS element level. If you're interested in building out connections, you can contact us, and we can help you get started with the first one and walk you through some of the best practices and how you would go about that and help you get that in place. And we already talked about that. And then finally, so the more technical among you, which would be me, wait, quick question. So theoretically, someone else could map the common data set questions here, and we could align our data elements to it and see where we're missing data elements defined for reporting. Yes. So if somebody else built that connection and listed out all those elements, and you had an align map, you could see where your gaps are inside your data. You could see your system. This system has these elements. This system has these elements. You'd be able to see all of that, and then you'd be able to see, oh, we're missing these 12 elements. Where are those at? Or how do we get those? So yes. Okay, for the more technical among you, if you're not aware, you can stand up a CEDS database, if you didn't even know that existed, in less than 3 minutes that contains every single CEDS element and option set. You would go to the normalized data schema under the data model tab. There are 2 SQL scripts here that allow you to first set up the database, and then the second populates all of the reference table with all of the option sets for CEDS, and then you have CEDS as a database installed in your own environment as well. There are several states that have this, that are using it. They're for various different reasons. Vendors have used it inside of their own systems for various different things as core part of what they use. At the beginning, I mentioned by the end of 2019, 10 to 15 state agencies will have CEDS as a core system. This is what they'll actually be building into their environment. And then the bulk of those 10 to 15 states will be using this database, and they'll also be using a free tool called Generate that will produce their special education EdFacts reports, as well as several other EdFacts reports out of that same system. So that's what's going to be core. If you're not familiar with what Generate is, or you want to know more, you can go to cid.grad360.org and scroll down on that front page. There's an introduction to Generate document there. But really what's cool about it's built on CEDS. So the entire foundation of that tool is the Common Education Data Standards. And it's a free tool. You can talk to Sid about how you would, get that or use that. But that, I think, that effort around Generate, I think, is really going to revolutionize data use and data standardization using CEDS. Just imagine, 10 states have all of their EdFax data at the student level stored locally at their own, so it's secure. Nobody else can see it. It's an individual installation in their own state, but the structure of that database is the same across 10 different states. So the resources that they could share from one state to another would be great, and their ability then to do their EdFax reporting out of it. Okay, so enough about that. Basically, when a data element's involved, there's an opportunity to use CEDS. We kind of went over that. Additional resources, in addition to the tutorials located on the website, there's a number of recorded videos from webinars we've done in the past posted on the community site. To see those, though, you have to join the community, and you can request to join the community by going to ceds-grad360.org. We post several resources in that location that are not on the CEDS website, and the reason being the CEDS website is more professional. This webinar, for instance, is going to be posted on that community site probably by sometime next week. But the webinar recordings of WebEx don't always sound as good as a professionally recorded video, so we put those over on the community site where the community can access that, and there's documents there and things like that they can go see. We post things there. They can have discussions, internal, they can ask questions of each other. Our work groups are there, all that kind of thing. We announce events and stuff like that over on that particular site. All of the tools we talked about today can be found at ceds.ed.gov. And very important to point out that arrow, if you have any questions or any additional training you would like, we can offer that. Please use the Contact Us button. We monitor those comments and anything that comes into there regularly, and then we can assist you with anything you need. We are just about at time, and so we're going to go on to questions, and when we do, I'll post this final slide here where you can contact us. The URL you provide, thank you. The URL I provided, going back over to here, is CIDTA. So CIIDTA.grads360.org. CID.grads is not going to get you anywhere. So very good. Thank you for pointing that out. It's CIDTA.grads360.org. Thank you very much for letting us know that. All right. Any questions we have inside of here? Will you be posting the presentation online? Yes, I will. Again, it'll be on the community site at ceds.grads360.org. So the only way to kind of get, it's also on YouTube, because that's where we'll put it. But trying to find that will be difficult, but you could probably search for CEDS 101 sometime next week, and you might be able to find that on YouTube there. Let me pull this up, see if there's any other questions. We'll get rid of this chat box. Are any ERP software companies using these guidelines for development of their databases? I don't know the answer to that question. But if you find out, I would certainly like to know. Yeah, that's about all I can go with that one. I know there's some post-secondary ones using that. Will you be, okay, I got all the questions. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to go ahead. I'll stay here if there's any other questions that kind of pop through, but everybody else, feel free to head out. That's all we have. Thanks for attending, and have a great day.